Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a Washington Post article entitled, U.S. Arrests Along the Mexico Border Top 2 million a year for the first time. Mr. Speaker, the numbers don't lie. If the annual number of apprehensions at the border is set to break records, that means fewer migrants are making it into the country. The notion that Biden is doing nothing is just absolutely not true. I would ask unanimous consent to submit this into the record.
Without objection.
And then just secondarily, my good friend and co-chair of the Cancer Survivors Caucus from Georgia, we have a wonderful relationship. On this, I agree, but I disagree on the process. As somebody who spent a lot of time on opioid abuse, and we know that in our experience with people like myself who survived cancer, particularly more painful ones, that is a product, when used properly, can bring relief to people. But we know about the abuse, and as you said, a lot of that led to fentanyl. We're against illegal drugs hurting Americans. We want to support effective remedies to that. I would say that one of the most effective things we can do, having had a long experience personally and professionally in behavioral health, is to invest in the kind of bill we have in front of us, with all due respect, with my name on it, to get upstream, so we make sure that people have the resources, evidence-based services, so it's not a subjective, to get the services they need to protect themselves in a, unfortunately, far too free market when it comes to the abuse of both legal and illegal drugs. So with all due respect, again, happy to work with you, but I really think, from my perspective, it's an argument to engage in the investment in behavioral health and mental health services, and still work with you to make sure that people aren't bringing these awful products across our border. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentlewoman from Minnesota. I rise today to oppose the previous question so that we can immediately consider H.R. 6184, the Halt Fentanyl Act. Now, before I begin, I have to address something that was said just now. I'm the wife of a first responder. My husband sees these overdoses every single day. And in my community, we, in just this year, have apprehended bricks of fentanyl stamped with border cartels stamps on them. We know it's coming from the border. We know that it's being trafficked across both in trucks at ports of entry, but also illegally. We know this to be a fact, and if we do not secure the border, this will continue to happen. And I will say, as the wife of a first responder, someone whose husband has continually responded to these calls and is reviving people who have been poisoned by fentanyl, it is not a matter of if he himself overdoses, it's when. And that is going to be a very bad day, because I think that members of this chamber need to be held responsible for the open border policies that this administration continues to allow. But I digress. 108,000. That is the number of Americans who died from drug overdoses last year. Of those, more than 80,000 were connected to opioids. The lion's share of those opioid deaths were linked to fentanyl. Now, it's important that we remember that these numbers are actually people. They are mothers, they are fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, aunts, uncles. They are people, not statistics. They are humans. They represent millions of families who will never see their sons, daughters, husbands, wife, brother, sister, father ever again. Millions of people whose families have been shattered and feel helpless, broken, and angry as these horrific substances destroyed their communities and their family. These thousands of victims represent communities crushed by this epidemic, swept away by the flood of lethal substances that are ripping apart the fabric of our society. These thousands of people lost lay bare the denial, the weakness, and the lack of compassion that this administration and my colleagues across the aisle have shown through their ambivalence towards border security, our nation's security, as literally tons of fentanyl is trucked and walked across the southern border and into our communities. Now, a few months ago, a mother from my district cried in my office as she told about her beautiful daughter, Mackenzie, who died from fentanyl poisoning, not overdosing, poisoning, after taking what she thought was a Xanax. She was 28 years old. Now, unfortunately, Mackenzie's story is not unique. It is not rare. Her mother, Rebecca, is now dedicating her life to saving mothers across the country from the pain that she has endured from a preventable loss and from daughters from Mackenzie's fate. To my colleagues on the left, you control this chamber, so it's up to you to decide. How many more Mackenzies have to die before you will take action? You can pretend that there's no crisis at the border. We see that. That's evidenced in your remarks. But we know that's a lie. You visit any community in this country, and you will see that it has been ravaged by the death and destruction wrought by fentanyl. You cannot deny it. Your constituents know it. The American people know it. It's time for our colleagues across the aisle to wake up. So I stand here once again, as I did back in March, fighting against the horrors of the opioid epidemic that have a stranglehold on our communities. We once again have an opportunity to take a stand, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans and concerned citizens. Today, for those that have lost their lives, but also for those potentially in the future. The families of those lost deserve this. Today is an opportunity to act. Today is an opportunity to put people above politics. And I want to commend my friend for his great work, the gentleman from Virginia, and sticking with this bill and seeing it across the finish line. And I urge my colleagues, please, think with your hearts.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
To defeat the previous question so that we may immediately
The gentlewoman's time has
expired.
expired.
With that, I yield back.